Welcome to episode 334 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. Joining me in a moment is Luke Lloyd, Head of Markets at the IPC, the International Post Corporation. We're going to talk about some of the key findings from the IPC's Global Postal Industry Report. Before we get to Luke, a quick reminder that if you go over to thepostalhub.com, there is an events section there. If you have a look in the events section, it lists some of the key or interesting events coming up in the postal and delivery industry during 2024. So head on over to thepostalhub.com, click on events, and you'll see that listing of events there, including the 7th Small Posts and Islands Postal Forum, which is being held in Reykjavik in April this year. So go on over to the Postal Hub and find out more about some of these events coming up in 2024. Right then, let's get on with the main event here. Luke Lloyd, Head of Markets at the IPC, talking about the Global Postal Industry Report. Joining me on the line is Luke Lloyd. Luke is the Head of Markets at the IPC. We're going to talk about the Global Postal Industry Report that was published at the end of 2023. Luke, just really quickly, before we get stuck into some of the interesting findings, this covered the 2022 year, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. The Global Postal Industry Report is based on all the postal annual reports that come out based on the previous financial year. So indeed, the 2023 report is based on all the annual postal reports from 2022. They are published up until the middle of 2023.
And so this is a very interesting year for us to start looking at, isn't it? Because it's sort of the year that we, on the one hand, we started to come out of the pandemic, and then all kinds of other things happened. Anyway, maybe I should let you do the talking here, Luke, instead of me rattling on. How about you start by giving us a bit of an overview of some of the post-pandemic parcel volume and revenue trends?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, this report is based on a lot of posts. It's based on 53 postal reports, so basically the 53 biggest posts in the world. And based on analyzing all their results together, you can see, first of all, if you look at parcels, parcel revenue grew by 2.2% in 2022, so financial year 2022. Though the parcel volume did dip slightly, it decreased by 3%. And this indeed is what you say, Ian. It's what we used to call the new normal or various other post-pandemic phrases. But of course, parcel volumes increased exponentially in the previous years. So parcel volume in the postal industry increased by 19% in 2020, 6% in 2021. But then now that growth has plateaued. And why? Of course, is the end of COVID. People are going back to the shops. And also there's a very competitive market, which keeps profit levels tight. And it's not just affecting the post. Of course, there are other providers. I know, for example, UPS were in the news just a few days ago, where also they're suffering from the volumes plateauing as well. So it's industry-wide, the level of parcels has stabilized after that very sharp increase in the pandemic.
Let's talk about letters then. What have you been noticing, or what has the IPC observed when it comes to letter volume trends?
Yeah, okay. So I'll give you a couple of stats on that one as well. Again, these are from the key findings report that we've both been reading as well. And in that, you can see that letter mail revenue declined by 4% and letter mail volume declined by 6% in 2022. And if you look at the reasons behind that, of course, it's the continuing e-substitution of letters to digital formats. You know, of course, how we get our bank statements and so many other things. And that always used to be a big driver of letters or advertising, is now pushed towards digital formats. So that's one reason. A big relation to that is the high material costs, for example, of ink, paper, and fuel in recent years. And linked to that as well is a difficult economic environment. So, of course, you had the COVID impact. And also since the end of COVID, there's been several wars that have had an impact on the world and also financially as well. And if we look at the slightly longer term trend, you can see that if you compare the 2022 results to a decade earlier, in 2012, the aggregate mail volumes have declined by around a third in advanced economies and by even 3/4 in certain posts. I mean, there's a very famous example of Denmark and how the letters have decreased quite quickly and very rapidly in that country. And if we look at the global level again, there was a very sharp drop in the beginning of the pandemic. So in 2020, there's a 14% volume decline in letter volumes. And then this decline did slow down by 7% in 2021, by 6% in 2022. So stabilizing, but still declining. And the interim results for 2023, so looking already to next year's report, indicates a similar decline in 23, just as in 2022. So definitely that trend is continuing, though not in the extreme way that we saw in 2020. And of course, posts have to look into solutions for that as well. So building in efficiencies, as you've discussed in several of your podcasts as well, and several posts reviewing their USOs due to the fact that people just send and receive letters less regularly. So many posts pivoting more towards parcels than letters to reflect how the market's changed in these last decade as well.
That issue of regulatory reform or postal legislation reform is a live one in a number of countries right now. A discussion for another day, perhaps, but it really does underline the fact that this is a live issue and a very important issue for postal operators. How about we look at then some overall revenue trends, Luke? Because one of the sort of the themes that we've had in the postal sector probably for 20 years is that of diversification of revenue. So moving from very much a letters-focused business to doing other things, whether it's in the delivery side of things or the post office side of things. I'll get it in a minute, everybody. Can you share some of those overall revenue trends, please?
Absolutely. And as you know, Ian, we've spoken a few times, and I'm a big nerd. And as a big nerd, I have a favorite graph in this report, and that's looking at the historical diversification. So it's on page, where am I now? On page 12 of this report for those who would download it later. And what it shows that in 2017, for example, mail accounted for 34% of postal global revenue, and parcels and express accounted for 21%. Now we switch forward 5 years later to 2022. Now mail accounts for 28%, parcels and express for 27%, and financial services with a huge role, actually, 31% of postal revenue. And logistics and freight increased from 8% up to 11% across that time. And this, like I said, I know it's very nerdy to have a favorite graph, but for me, it just in one single graph illustrates just how the industry has changed to being driven by mail, to the fact that now mail for a lot of posts is more of a, I wouldn't say minority, it's still a huge chunk, but it's no longer the key driver. So a few further information points within that is 71% of posts, they derive less than half of their revenue from mail in 2022, whereas previously the vast majority derived much more than half of their revenue from mail. And also within this, you can see that there are lots of variations by individual posts. So for example, Japan Post or Poste Italiane, financial services is very important from a revenue perspective and an organizational perspective. Or if you look at Deutsche Post DHL, where logistics and freight is, of course, a key sector for them as well. So that also accounts for a very large proportion of their revenue, even as termed a postal player. And of course, looking a bit further, I mean, I work for the International Post Corporation, and we see within those posts that split out international versus domestic, you can see that over time, international revenue has increased. So international now accounted for 22% of revenue in 2022, compared to 17% of revenue in 2017. So that number ties in quite easily there, but it has shown the growing importance of international within that revenue play as well. And just one final thing to mention as well, in terms of diversification, as it is indeed very important, it's actually the theme of the IPC annual conference, which will take place in May 2024 in Paris, where we get lots of our member CEOs, or most of our member CEOs will come together, and we're discussing diversification, which of course is a big topic, and we'll discuss certain individual subtopics within that as well, to really get the CEO perspective on how they see the post diversifying in the future as well.
I think there's an interesting discussion to be had also about the public's perception of the post as we diversify. And you mentioned about logistics and things like that. As posts diversify away from that core traditional, whatever you want to, some people would say legacy business of the letters, how the public perceives the post as well. Perhaps, again, a discussion for another day. Luke, what you've mentioned that this is a global report. And it's not just looking at one region of the world. So can you share, are there any regional differences that the report has uncovered, such as, well, maybe there might have been parcel growth more in one region than in another? Is there anything you can share with us there, please?
Yeah, sure. If I'm doing a very tiny sales pitch, I can mention to you the report that you see now is a public version. The Global Postal Industry Report is one of the few reports that IPC also sells. So for those who are interested, you can also buy the report. You can reach out to me. And there you have a lot more information on country by country case studies, and really for every post to see exactly how it all breaks down. So we sell that to certain companies every year. But anyway, that's the end of the sales pitch. What I can tell you from this public version is you see indeed differences by post. So for example, I was looking at the graphs in this version, and you can see that actually letter mail, while there's been an overall decline in almost every country, that there are 13% of the posts actually grew their letter mail in 2022, which is quite surprising that there's still a few places where letter mail has been growing, which is encouraging. And if we look at parcels as well, you've got 11% of posts in 2022 saw a very large increase in parcel volumes, so an increase of more than 10%, while the majority, 70%, saw a volume decline. So there's definitely a lot of differences by country as well. And a big reason behind this, especially from the parcel perspective, is that the e-commerce growth is varying by country. So, for example, if we look at the growth of e-commerce, if we look at other sources like Euromonitor or eMarketer, different external sources, they'll tell you that currently and forecast, for a lot of Western European markets, e-commerce is, I would never say reach the peak, because there's always room to grow, but it's definitely slowed down a lot. And for example, post-COVID, we've seen a decline in e-commerce, for example, in countries like Germany or Austria, whereas e-commerce is still growing very quickly in Latin America, for example, as well. So of course, the growth of e-commerce has an impact in terms of the market potential for those parcel volumes as well.
So there's much more that you can dive into if you want to purchase the full IPC report. And there is what is it? It's we'll call it a Reader's Digest version.
Indeed.
The
key findings report is the one that we've been discussing today.
Key findings report. And I'll put a link to the IPC website on the episode page on thepostalhub.com, so you can click through to download the key findings report. And if you're interested in getting the whole thing, you can get in contact with Luke or the IPC to purchase the report. Luke, I just want to share with everybody what the website is for the IPC, please.
Yeah, sure. You can just go to www.ipc.be. And one last thing I forgot, I did say I was doing a sales pitch, but of course, if you're an IPC member post, of course, you've got access to that report for free as well. So all of our members will have access to that big report.
There we go, everybody. Membership has its benefits. What was that? Was it American Express, wasn't it? Years ago.
Maybe. I won't question it.
Anyway, so there you go. Obviously, IPC members can download the report free as part of your membership. Luke Lloyd, Head of Markets at the IPC. Thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you, Ian.
Of course, that slogan for American Express was "Membership has its privileges," not membership has its benefits, or whatever it was I said. Anyway, looking forward now, coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, Carmen Correo from Geopost, Cedric Hervé from Cardinal, and many other great guests will be appearing on the Postal Hub podcast. Make sure you don't miss any of these interviews. Subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast platform like Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., etc. And please do subscribe to my email newsletter. Go to thepostalhub.com and sign up for the weekly newsletter, or sign up for my daily delivery digest, or the post office digest, if that's your kind of thing. Remember that you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can follow the Postal Hub on LinkedIn as well, so you get some postal and delivery goodness in your LinkedIn feed during the week, instead of all that self-congratulatory rubbish that's out there at the moment. Not that I'm at all annoyed by it. No. What else? Oh, email me. If you want to email me, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.